Welcome to Recap with HCAP, where you're going to be hearing testimonials of alumni who have completed Hope Core courses and their ITW. Enjoy!
Alright, welcome back to our first episode. This has been a long time coming. It's been a minute since we've been in the studio, but we are back with some exciting news. This is the first episode of our new podcast, and that's going to be called Recap with HCAP. And the purpose of this podcast is it will be to bring you recaps of ITWs, interviews with alumni, and exciting events. And we are really excited to be kicking off today's episode. We have with us today for our first episode the assistant pastor, Sunday school pastor, mentor, HC alumni, assistant director, and longtime friend of mine, Brother Mitchell Elder. So, Brother Mitchell, thank you for joining us.
Yes, ma'am. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. It's been a minute. I know you're no stranger to the studio, but it's good to have you with Recap.
Yes, it's good to be on this podcast. I'm excited about this.
Oh, we're excited too. Been in the works for a minute, but we are ready to finally get it rolling. So the goal of today is to talk about the importance of not only alumni, but the alumni's function in the local church. So here in Pueblo, we have what we call HCAP, which is Hope Core Alumni Pueblo. And can you talk about why that started? Like, what got that off the ground?
So going back probably 5 years, maybe a little bit more than that, Bishop was actually finishing or had just finished his master's degree, and he began to study different alumni from different colleges. He was looking at Harvard, Yale. A lot of people don't know this, but many of those universities, they hold their self-accreditation. They're not accredited by any accreditation from the world or the United States, etc. They have their own funding. Many of them don't really receive funding from the United States government or other governments. They have their own funding, and he began to dig into that, and it comes from the alumni. It comes from the alumnus of the school. So when you have a huge gathering or body of alumni that get behind something like Harvard or Yale or other ones, they help push that college to another level that would not be obtained without the alumni. And as he began to see that, he began to ask himself, and he also began to ask people like the Hope Core board, hey, why is there what are we doing with the alumni? There's always been this question of what happens after graduation.
Yeah.
And some people they ask that question in it's a genuine sincereness, and then other people they ask the question and then you tell them what to do, and they're like, well, I don't know about that. But anyway, that's a different topic.
A different topic, yeah.
So he began to approach it that way. Hey, why don't we begin to start chapters? He approached it 3 or 4 times, and the ball never progressed. I truthfully don't know why it didn't. Probably because the Hope Core board is always extremely busy, both with Hope Core, and then many of them are pastors and bishops overseeing them. One of them is currently the president of Wilson University, so that's Bishop Wilson. So it shows you the level that they're engaged in, not just Hope Core, but everything else. So finally, in perfect Paul Elder fashion, he's like, okay, you guys aren't going to do it. So he just did it. Yeah. And that's where HCAP started. Now, obviously, we didn't have that name then, but he approached Brother James and Sister Tina Salas. He asked them to oversee it. And then Sister Tina and Brother James worked with Bishop for, I want to say, about 1.5 to 2 years. She could give you an exact answer to really find that complete vision of what we do now. So that's really where HCAP comes from. And now you're starting to see, it is few and far between, but you're starting to see churches understand the full potential of having a local alumni chapter. And so they are starting, to pop up around the United States, which is a really exciting thing.
So in your experience from our local church, what are some things that you've seen our Hope Core alumni have direct impact in? What are some things they've been involved in that you can kind of talk about?
Two of the biggest areas that I see would be in the leadership of Christian Growth Center, the leading, and not that all people in the church are not supposed to be leading, but people in the church that hold a named position of the church, whether that be, piano player, whether that be music director, whether that be Sunday school teacher of such and such a class. When you begin to look through the different leadership roles of Christian Growth Center, the vast majority of people in those places have done Hope Core, and the vast majority of those people have finished Hope Core all the way through the ITW and graduated with their certificate. I have reasons why I think that is. One of them is because of the things they teach you in Hope Core. Part of what they focus on is leadership. But also people on the personal side, people that are truly called and answer the call for leadership are constantly looking for a means to grow and to progress. And Hope Core offers an amazing avenue to do that.
Absolutely.
And the other way that I see Hope Core alumni influencing not just our church now, but I would say the community, is the alumni catching the vision that as we grow, it goes out, it flows out of us. So now, like, we had an event today that's very tied up with Hope Core, and the alumni hosted here at the church for ladies that was open to any ladies that wanted to come. It wasn't just a Christian Growth Center event. It was hosted by Christian Growth Center. And really, when you dig into the inner workings, whether it may never be announced this way, sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. It's Hope Core alumni that are behind that, pushing that vision to, okay, we've got it. Now let's get the church to get it. And now that the church is getting it, okay, why don't we get our community and even beyond? The outflow of the missions department, Brother Paul Hicks and Sister Rana Hicks, they're both alumni, and they oversee the missions department of Christian Growth Center. They're in Vietnam and other countries pretty much every single year, sometimes multiple times. And so you see Hope Core has become an avenue for people that want to grow at Christian Growth Center to say, they can look around them and say, hey, Sister Jess did it, Sister Maudie did it, Brother Hicks did it, Brother Jordan Pound, now he's about to go on he just came back from his ITW. Yeah. Even all the way up to First Lady, my mom is about to go on her ITW. In fact, probably by the time you guys hear this, she'll be back from her ITW. And so you look around and you're seeing the fruit, and the Bible says that you shall know them by their fruit. You're looking around and seeing the fruit of this, and more people are getting involved. But that's the two main areas that I see the local alumni here, specifically in Pueblo, has had a huge impact on Christian Growth Center.
And also, I know that the local alumni here has spearheaded two events that have taken place outside of our local church. One of those, I think, was our first, what we called the Hope Core Explosion, and that took place in Pratt, Kansas. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like, especially like from the inside workings to like the outside workings and what they've seen since that time? The other event, too, was in Greeley.
Yes.
And that was actually another alumni who's pastoring there, Brother Jeff Elder. So he's Hope Core alumni, and he's also in charge of ITW, and that's going to be happening this week, right now.
Yeah.
And so can you kind of talk about those events and the impact that the alumni had coming together? Because I know it wasn't just CGC alumni. It was literally alumni from everywhere coming in to help.
So the Hope Core Explosion really started with a text between the whole elder tribe. I think there's about 20 some odd people in this text, and sometimes it's really great, and then other times you think about the times that it's really great. No, it really is. It's amazing to always be connected to the family. And I don't remember exactly what the full context of the specific comment was, but the comment was basically, why do we not see more churches that are well established? They're running, 100, 200, 300, 1,500, 2,500 people and in regular attendance. And this isn't just the people that show up. These are faithful saints. They're paying their tithes. They're engaged. They're a part of that church. How come you don't see those churches, more of them, going out and planting churches or assisting other churches to plant churches? And that's not to say that they aren't, but the question was, how come more of them aren't? Three really that I can think of off the top of my head right now that are doing that. Besides Christian Growth Center would be the Rock Church of Fort Myers. Pastor Randy Williams is working in conjunction with people both in Florida and also in Haiti and in Africa to help plant churches. The Rock Church in Elk Grove, California, is doing the same thing. Their youth pastor, Boston Young, I know of 2 churches that he's planted with the assistance of that church. Now, Brother Casey Sees is planting a church, and there's a couple other men. I can't remember their names right now. They're doing it. And then Pastor Nathaniel Urshan is working in conjunction with the young men of his church, and then also the Spanish work that's an outgrowth of their church. So there's 3 churches that are doing that. But the question was, why aren't all of the churches doing that or more? So I don't remember, we had the conversation, obviously. I don't really remember much of it, but I do remember putting the phone down, and I began to ask myself, why aren't more churches? What is the thing that's stopping churches from doing that?
Yeah.
And there really was nothing. And then also there's old sermons you can find when the vision of Hope Core was being cast. And you can listen to these sermons preached by some of the founders of Hope Core. And that was one of the visions of Hope Core, was that, yes, it would take people that need new direction or have no direction or want to grow. They have direction, but they don't know how to grow. It is for those people. But another thing was to create a means to plant churches in the United States and throughout the world. And some people have done that. I know one of the churches that Pastor Randy Williams, I believe he helps oversee that. I believe the pastor of that church considers him his pastor, is 100% a result of Hope Core. But you don't see it as much as I think the founding members wanted that to happen. So anyway, we're thinking about it, and I finally reached out to my brother and my sister, and I said, hey, we need to make this happen. This is the vision of Hope Core. Let's make it happen. So thankfully, Brother Joe Solis and Sister Sarah Solis, not related to the Solis of Christian Growth Center in blood, but in spirit, we reached out. That's my aunt and uncle. We reached out to them and said, hey, we want to try this, and it may work great, and it may be a complete failure. Can we do this? We reached out to their pastor, which is Brother Nathan Carricker in Hutchinson, Kansas. And then we also reached out to my uncle Greg Charles and Marcia Charles, my aunt, in Garden City. And there was a couple other churches from around there that once they saw this happening, they pitched in and helped. So we leaned on all the alumni that we could from Pueblo, and then there's some alumni in Hutchinson, and then other churches that had no alumni at all. They just wanted to be involved. Yeah. By all means. Yeah. And the goal was to put a flyer on every single dwelling, so every single residence, not every single building, but every single residence in Pratt, Kansas, and we were able to do that. Yeah. It's a smaller city in Kansas, and I think there was 7,000 or 8,000 residencies. Awesome. And so while we were there a Friday and a Saturday and a Sunday. We did outreach Thursday night when some of us got there, and Friday, and a little bit on Saturday. We got about 90% of the way through, and then Brother and Sister Solis finished up the next Saturday. So within a full week span, every single person in Pratt was aware of the fact there is an apostolic church in this city. So that was the main goal, was to let them know the church is here. Another goal was to just have someone come alongside of a home missions pastor and to help boost them to, I think one of the coolest things for me and probably for them was to see their church building filled up to over capacity. I mean, literally standing room
basement.
only, people in the basement, people out the doors. And you always want to see it. And sometimes spiritually you see it, but they physically saw, this is what God wants this church to look like, packed to capacity. So that was cool. We did, like I said, we did outreach. We did a praise in the park where we just had really good music in the park on Saturday. We had several after event dinners. And then Sunday, we had Brother Seth Shoemake come in and preach. And he actually preached a youth event Friday night. And then he preached one main service on Sunday, more of like a revival type service specifically for that church, because a lot of the other churches had to go back home for that Sunday. Yeah. We had a few alumni stay to help with the after dinner, but most of all the alumni and helpers were gone by Sunday. It was just back to the local church. Out of that, they had 2 or 3 people baptized and filled with the Holy Ghost. But the outgrowth of that is much deeper. For instance, they had several backsliders reach out to them and say, we didn't even know there was an apostolic church here. We were unaware of that, and now they're aware. So these people that probably felt completely disconnected, all of a sudden they realize God is still reaching. There's still means for us to be saved. We did pretty much the same thing in Greeley the next year, with amazing success. There were people that were baptized out of it, people that were filled with the Holy Ghost out of it. And it's the same thing. It's coming alongside a smaller church, which now Greeley is exploding in revival. I think awesome. They're averaging, 60, 70 people per service
in their new building.
And in a new building that they just got. And they're working right now. It's rented, but in the next few weeks, they'll probably be able to put an offer on that. Just amazing. They were able to get into the colleges of Greeley, just the doors that opened because of that. And then we actually just did the same event here in Pueblo with the same thing. I think we had, I don't even know, 7,000-8,000 flyers that went out. Pueblo is sectioned up into about 5 major parts, and we were able to do one of those whole sections in like 2 days.
Yeah, 2-3 days.
So that's the Hope Core explosion. That's probably the biggest event that our alumni does every year. And it's probably the most impactful spiritually that we do every year. And it's also probably the most labor-intensive event we do every year.
Yeah. I know, speaking from Greeley to Pueblo, because I wasn't able to go to Pratt. I think I was in the middle of my Hope Core journey at that point. But my daughter went, and she came back, and she was just so impacted by saying, Mom, we put a flyer on every door. And then when we went to Greeley and we drove into the city, driving to their old building, you could see the flyers like on the door, like kind of flapping in the wind. And it was like every single door you passed, which was just incredible.
Yeah.
But I know probably the most impactful for me was Pueblo. Home turf, going, like you said, you walked all of 4th Street.
Yeah.
And you didn't know it's quite that long.
It was that long to walk the whole street.
But going down there and again, driving and seeing your church's flyer on all of those doors, that to my knowledge, I mean, I don't know if we've ever tracked outreach like we have.
So we did when Bishop first moved here. He went all the way through Pueblo with basically him and Sister Elder and maybe 1 or 2 other people. And then when I was younger, we did the same thing. But it's probably been, there's been outreach every single, but that methodical of we're going to do every single house, every single street, it probably hasn't been done here in Pueblo in 10, 15 years. It's been a long time.
Wow. So I know we see the direct impact of Hope Core alumni, and you travel quite a bit in your travels. So I guess the next question would be, what is the most exciting thing for you when you're running the booth or when you're preaching out? Do people come up to you and talk about their Hope Core? Do you corner people and you're like, hey, I know you were in Hope Core. What did you think? How do those interactions affect you? And what are some of the, I guess, inspiring stories that you've heard in those encounters?
So one of the most amazing things is very rarely do I actually have to ask people. More so it's when they see me and realize I'm connected to Hope Core. There's an immediate bond because you realize we both went through this very deep spiritual thing together. We may have done it 10 years apart, We may have done it 15 years apart, but we went through this thing together. And so there's an immediate connection. There's an immediate bond. And some of the fascinating things about it is you can talk to somebody that's been in church 2 years and then talk to somebody that's been in church 20 years and they both did Hope Core. And what it did to them is obviously it's unique to that person, but it's also profoundly similar in the way that it galvanizes them back into action. If they feel like, okay, I'm kind of disconnecting, I need to re-engage, they'll be brought back to that place. And then people that are new are brought to that place. So you see, like I said, it's unique. It's different for every person, but you see similarities across all stories. One of the most impactful stories to me, and it wasn't actually told directly to me, it was told to my sister, but I was standing at the booth, I overheard it, and then I saw the fruit of it, which blew me away. And there's a brother and a sister, they pastor a church connected to Pastor Randy Williams in Florida. They pastor just a little ways, couple hours from Brother Williams in Florida. Him and his wife did Hope Core right when they were basically home missionaries. And when you look at their church now, I'm not even going to guess what they're running now because it's been several years since I heard this story. But at that point, we were at Summit. We were at the WPF Summit in Pigeon Forge. They had a bus of 30-something people that walked in with them. 20, 30 people walked in with them, walked right past the booth. And the whole conference, I'm watching these people walk around, and I understand these people are here, and that pastor and pastor's wife will tell you, we started a church, and we're doing what we're doing because of Hope Core. If it was not for Hope Core, none of this would happen. So you see all these people walking by, and you're blown away because you realize that is the potential of Hope Core. When you do Hope Core right, and then you finish your courses, and then you come home and you set it loose, that is what it's capable of doing.
Yeah. I think Hope Core, like you said, equips you to come home and either A, get plugged back in, or B, it gives you that momentum and that trajectory to just go do it.
Yeah.
Just put boots on the ground and go do it.
Yep.
Man, gotta love Hope Core. The final question is, what is your vision for the alumni? What is Brother Mitchell Elder's vision for the alumni of not only Pueblo, but beyond? What would you like to see the alumni become?
So I've actually spent a lot of time praying about this because what happens with something like Hope Core, and thankfully I don't think that this has happened with Hope Core, but there's always the potential for it to happen, is that God gives man a vision, which is what Hope Core is. It's no one man's vision. It's God's vision for this entity called Hope Core, this body, this movement. It's given to man, and often what you'll see this with denominations, organizations. You see them hijacked eventually by people or sometimes spirits. Sometimes it's a whole movement. A great example of this would be the civil rights movement. When you study the civil rights movements in the United States, there's probably two main civil rights movements, maybe more. But when you study them, they actually started as revivals. You see these huge revivals breaking down racial barriers. And then you see them hijacked by politicians. And so instead of becoming the purest form of tearing down racial barrier, which is Christianity, all of a sudden it's these politicians, they're doing backdoor deals, they're making money. You have great men like MLK getting shot and just this crazy stuff happening. And it's all because this thing that was God's vision has been hijacked. And so I've spent a lot of time praying and contemplating, talking to the leaders of Hope Core, the elders, listening to the old sermons, and trying to understand, okay, God, what is your vision for Hope Core so that it doesn't ever get hijacked, but it stays the tool you want it to be? I think one of those things that we have not seen come to fruition yet is planting churches. There is no reason why. There's different barriers to this, and there's a lot of moving parts to this, and there's a lot of angles to consider. But there's no reason why 3 or 4 churches cannot put their local alumni bodies together and go to a city next to them and plant a church. Mm-hmm. And within 3 months, 6 months, a year of several churches working together, they're walking away with a church of 20, 30, 40 people and an established pastor that's been called to that city. And some people are like, well, you got to have, somebody's got to be called. I promise you, if you go put a church in a city, God will make sure the leader shows up. God will put a leader there. So I would love to see that. We have seen it in little pockets here and there. That's one of the reasons why I believe God gave our local chapter the ability to do the explosions, because the ultimate fulfillment of that, and we will do this one day, is to plant churches. So right now, this is more like a testing phase of, okay, this worked, this didn't work.
Yeah.
So how can, once we know what works and what doesn't work, how can we do this over an extended time period between us and several different churches? How can we do this for 6 months and then walk away and there's an established church?
Yeah.
Because if you're going to go for 6 months with a local body giving out of themselves, you've got to do that correctly or you'll harm the local body.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the first goal, if you're talking about a local church, the first goal is obviously that local church, to make sure the church is healthy. But once a church is healthy, if it doesn't give outside of itself, it'll become unhealthy.
Yeah.
So you got to have that balance, and there's men of God, our bishop here, that understands that way better than I do. But I would like to see the alumni engage in a way that really you see it's happened in spurts and little pocket areas. Brother Tim Haddon, I believe, is pastoring a church that was started pretty much by alumni, and it was directly like a Hope Core push. It's not just that there was a church and now it has an alumni pastor, because I don't believe Brother Haddon's ever done Hope Core, but it was in conjunction with Hope Core to go there and plant a church. That's what I'm talking about, where it's Hope Core is directly planting churches and then overseeing that church and praying and seeking God, and God will bring a man to that city.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things. There's other things, smaller things, but I think to me that is one of the visions that's always been connected to Hope Core that has never really been brought to complete fruition.
Wow. What an incredible vision, and something to join you in prayer about and others in prayer about, that the alumni will reach that eventually.
I think we will. I think we're seeing enough. And there's in everything, there's always going to be people that don't do it and say they hate it, and people that do it and then they kind of fall off the tracks, and it makes the people that did it and stayed on track. There's all these different things that happen. Yeah. But there's enough of a nucleus that's building within the Hope Core alumni of people that really are going to do whatever God says to do, that it's going to reach a critical stage. It's going to reach a critical mass where it just begins to happen, because there's enough people in enough of the right places to where God can look at it and say, okay, do this. And there's enough people to say, okay, yeah, we're going to do it.
There's enough resources there too.
Yep.
And I look to like the influx of those coming in, and for lack of a better word, the energy and the passion they have. Mm-hmm. And they really are the next generation of alumni. But you have those kids that are seeing it, but they have to wait because they're not quite old enough. They've got 5-6 more years to go. But their goal is, I'm going to do that. I'm going to wear one of those blue shirts. I'm going to go through the process.
Yep.
And that to me is really awesome.
It is. It's part of keeping the forward momentum. I know here in Christian Growth Center, you do almost get cornered and questioned, like, hey, why haven't you done Hope Core yet? Like, what are you doing? And I understand it's not for everybody, but it's for almost everybody.
And a lot of people say that, well, is Hope Core is it really for everyone? I think Hope Core is a great, affordable. Everyone's like, oh, well, it's too much. 4 college classes at that price and that missions trip at that price is probably one of the most affordable tastes of the mission field you'll ever get. Yeah. Other than quitting your job and moving down there. I mean, there's that option too, right? But going through that process is probably one of the most affordable ways to get a taste, but also grounding you, grounding you in the things that your church teaches, but getting it for yourself. My husband will tell you, I had to write papers about what I believed. And that was like the hardest thing. Wasn't the lectures and the discussions. It was taking what I believed, putting it in words, and then putting it on paper for someone else to read and say, well, yeah. And he goes, that was the hardest part, but that's part of the growing process.
Yep. And Wilson U has done an excellent job hosting those courses for Hope Core, but also coming alongside of that and saying, for those that want, here is the next step. Yeah. You can go on to the LEAP program. You can go from LEAP into an associate's. You can go right from an associate's into a bachelor's, into a master's, and now they're on course to have doctoral studies through there. Yeah. So you really can continue in this growth as far as God needs you to grow. And it's an amazing thing that Hope Core, while it has its own side of this, that God has so ably, as only He can, put Hope Core connected to something like Wilson U that can help you say, okay, yes, do Hope Core. But like for me, I finished Hope Core, and several years later, I felt God challenged me again, okay, you need to grow further. And so I was able to go back through pretty much some of the same instructors and do the next layer, which was LEAP. And for Bishop, for our pastor here, Brother Elder, he was able to go all the way through to a master's degree in that same vein. It's the same theology. It's the same vision. It's the same spirit. A lot of times you get like, okay, you go to school here and you get this person's spirit, and then you go to school here and you get this person's spirit, and you end up with kind of this conglomerate. It's not always a bad thing, but it is different when you're working through the same vision. It's all the same vision connected together.
Yeah. Well, Brother Mitchell, I want to be the first to thank you very much for being on this podcast with us today, our first episode.
Thank you.
We look forward to having you again, and maybe some other people will join you next time.
Yeah.
We thank you all for tuning in to our first episode of Recap, and we'll catch you later.